The beauty of the Bytown Fire Brigade Historical Society Museum is that we capture the development of society in the Ottawa area. So one of the biggest threats to any organized population is the threat of fire. So it started off with buckets. So there was enforced a bylaw that said you had to have 2 buckets on your front porch when the Bytown was very, very small. And then as the community grew, we got more advanced pieces of fire equipment like this Dominion, and that's 1850. That's before it's called the City of Ottawa. And this is very efficient. It would take hundreds and hundreds of people to operate because there's 2 levers that go back and forth. And once you start supplying the stream, the people on they call them the brakes. The people on the brakes that are doing the pumping action usually only lasted 2 minutes. And then there had to be more people. So you needed hundreds of people. So the first organization of the fire departments were a whole bunch of people to show up the scene and pump the shafts to make an effective fire stream. Then we move on from that, 1850 to 1885, we have a horse-drawn steam fire engine. So this required full-time people because you had to have a driver that took care of the horses and housed in a station, and then you had to have an engineer to run the steamer on the back. And then technology is advancing. That's a piston device, much like an internal combustion engine, whereas this is a rotary gear turbine. So the steam would turn the turbine and then move a shaft and turn the pump. But the same thing starts, you get a suction here that you would put down into a water source, whether it was the ditch, a creek, a swimming pool, a cistern, and you would pump the water up and the water would come out here and you would effectively go and fight the fire, just like those hoses down there. Then you move to the next part, which is motorized fire apparatus, much larger, much more efficient, and doing a much better job. This particular piece has an interesting history in so much that it first started service in Detroit, Michigan in 1886. And then it was traded in on motorized fire apparatus to the American LaFrance, or American Fire Engine Company. And then in 1914, the City of Ottawa was tested by ULC. Now, when you have a fire extinguisher, you look on the side of the fire extinguisher, it has a ULC rating. Fire trucks have a ULC rating. And the rating of the equipment that you have in the community that you live in determines the level of fire protection that you have. So you're graded as a fire department. In 1914, they inspected the Ottawa Fire Service, which had several similar to this in service, and they brought them down to the Rideau Canal and started pumping water with them, and they were nowhere near as efficient as they had been when they were new. So their rating went from 1 to a 3 or a 4, so that meant every time you went to pay your fire insurance, it went way up. So of course, taxpayers do what they do best. They started phoning their elected officials and got them all stirred up. And so they decided in 1915 that they were going to buy 3 motorized fire apparatus to replace the steamers that were failing. So in the meantime, to keep their rating, they made an agreement with the American LaFrance Company in about 1915 to have this sent up as a relief engine. So it was put on the truck in the States and sent up to Canada. It created a problem because it had no value, and of course when you're crossing the border it has to have a value so that you can pay taxes on it. But it didn't have a value. So there's paperwork that shows that happened. It came here and then it was put into service, but the problem was that all the threads on the attachments were different in Canada than they were in the US. So they had to adapt to that. But it still saw service in Ottawa for about 6 months while they were manufacturing the motorized fire apparatus that came up into Ottawa. Then it became spare or redundant, and it sat in a station. And on June the 7th, 1915, the village of Russell had a large fire that was going from building to building because the sidewalks were wooden, and it started in the tinsmith shop and it was going to burn the whole village down, so they put a call in for help, and the fire chief in Ottawa said, well, send the Silsby down. So they put it on a flat cart with 14 firefighters, and they raced down the Ottawa, New York Central Railway, which is no longer now, but it's a bicycle path, or a snowmobile trail, or a walking path down around Osgood. You can walk all the way to Russell. And that's the train it was on, and it showed up in the village and saved the village from total destruction. So it was actually a hero, along with the 14 firefighters that came from Ottawa. 2 weeks later, the fire chief sent a telegram to the village of Russell asking for his firemen back. They had been there for 2 weeks, if you can imagine. They were heroes down there, so they were having a good time, just in case it started to fire again. So the very smart people in Russell decided, well, how are we going to use this? We can't have a guy on duty all the time with horses and ready to go. So they built a little dam on the Castor River. If you're going through Russell, you look to the east and you're going to see the dam is still there too, so that there's always water for this. And then they built a shed over top of this, so when they wanted water up in the main street, they'd go and light the boiler. The water would pump up the main street, fill all the water troughs for the horses, etc. And then when they didn't want it, the fire would go out, the water would drain right back down into the Castor River. In 1954, the boiler, which is a riveted porcupine boiler, failed its test. So it was taken out of service, and it was bought by Alex Dayton and put at the Town and Country Motel, which was where Carling Avenue crosses Richmond Road, and it stood there till about 1980, and that's when it was turned into a McDonald's. And it left there and it went to the Marble Works on Nicholas Street, just by the old police station. And then from Nicholas Street, it went to the Mill Group Up, just down there on the Parkway on the bridge that goes over to Gatineau. We bought it from there, but it was quite difficult because it was belonged to by a numbered Ontario corporation, which you could never really chase down who really owned it and make a decision. It took us quite a while, but we bought it. This is the shape that we got it in, and we've been slowly restoring many pieces on it to give it the look that it has today. Are there any questions?
No, well, maybe not that much relevant to the story, but I